My name is Ryan Holland. I'm one of the developers at the RMS Support Center. We're going to cover a few things today. We're going to cover how to create custom reports from scratch using Telerik. We're going to cover how to build a contract report and a district report, and I'll show you how to actually convert a FAST report, or I should say recreate a Telerik template from a FAST report template. And so we'll cover some of the basics. If you're not super familiar with custom reports, we'll cover some of that too. Custom reports are limited to government users only. Custom reports can be found within the district library. There's really two main modules for custom reports that you'll be working on. And that does depend on what level of custom reports you're making, that you're working on. The two main modules that you'll be working in is the custom reports module and the query definitions module. The custom reports module is where all the templates are. We store both the FAST report templates and Telerik custom report templates in this module. For the query definitions, this area is for users to go ahead and make a query to run across our database where you can pull data from against your district. Very useful tool. And you can export this in spreadsheets. It's super useful module. These query definitions are also used to run custom reports as well. The query definitions that were made in FAST reports will work for Telerik, so there's no need to recreate the query definitions. You might do some tweaking if it makes it easier in terms of the actual template design, but there's no need. It'll still use the same data set from the query definitions. So let's go ahead and jump into the custom reports module. Right off the bat, you'll see a data grid with all of the FAST report templates. There's nothing in Telerik quite yet in here. We separated them. That way you can run them side by side. That way you can look at both designers, pull data, and recreate the reports that you want to bring into Telerik. And so in order to get to the Telerik report designer, all you have to do is click on the button in the right-hand corner that says UAT designer. It's going to give you a prompt. Go ahead and say OK. So now we can see our data grid has changed. There's far less report templates here. These are all the Telerik report templates that are in this current district, which is our T2 test district. And so again, if you want to switch between the two, you can switch with this button. You can go back to FAST reports and Telerik. You can even open up another instance of RMS and run both at the same time. We'll actually do that a little bit later in the training today. So let's go ahead and create a custom report. We're going to create a contract custom report. And so I'm going to just add a new custom report template. And the report edit view, which is the view that I'm on, is very similar to what you would see in FAST reports. There are a couple differences, and I'll talk about those in just a second. So right off the bat, you can see we have our report title. You can set the author's name. Then we have our report type. This is one of the bigger changes that we have between FAST report and Telerik. This report type determines what level of report that you're going to be making. So you can make a contract level report, and that will be put in the contract reports module, or you can make a district report, which will be placed in the summary reports module. Depending on the selection that you have here, actually affects the collections that you'll see down here. And the lookup, when you click this button, you'll see a lookup of collections that are available to you. Contract report types do not contain any queries. Queries can only be ran on the district level. So just a little note there, you can only make custom queries at the district level. Right below that, we have a report menu. And this is for those descriptors that you would see on the contract report module or the summary report module. And it's the groupings that you would see for the reports. And so we have a couple options right there. That way you can organize your reports in a good fashion. So the next thing that we have to the right is our record GUID. And let me go ahead and pull this up really quickly. All right. So the record GUID does play a little bit of a role in Telerik. We do something a little bit differently. So when you launch the Telerik Report Designer, what we do is we bring down a fresh template for you to use, and we bring it down to the client's machine. And you can actually see these files in this file path. It ends in RMS3 TR Reports Templates. If you haven't changed the default path, then it'll be in your C drive and program files, but it'll always end in this. And so that record is actually the file name of your report that you're working on. And this allows you can actually make backups of these report templates. You can share these report templates. And so a little handy tool right there as well. Right below that, we have 3 flags for your report template. While this is marked under construction, there will actually be a little label that notifies any users that are in either contract reports or summary reports that this report is under construction, that it's not finished. So that flag is there if you're still currently working on your template. Below that, we have 2 flags where you can indicate if you want it to be available for the government mode or contractor mode. The contractor mode is only available for contract reports, not for summary reports. And then right below that, you can add a report description of what your report does. Again, the required collections right here, this will be the data set that you're going to use for your report. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Below that, we have these 2, they look a little bit new, a little bit different. 2 new fields. This field was actually in the Fast Reports edit view, but it actually wasn't really working. So the report type, let me go ahead and talk about that a little bit again. One of the improvements that we have in Telerik is that you can now run contract level reports. In Fast Reports, you can only make district report types. The contract collections actually never made it into the designer. So we were able to fix that issue with Telerik. So you'll be able to use contract collections and run reports on the contract level. And this field here just indicates what report you want to run data on while you're designing that report. It doesn't specify the report or the contract where that report runs. This will actually go into all the contracts. The other field that we have here is a brand new one. This is for a feature that we just added. It's called RMS Custom Collection Fields. And when you click on this, there's another collection that you can add here called Contract Status Funded and Unfunded Changes. And what that is, it allows you to use the funding chart and the contract status photo within the report template. We actually bring those into the template for you to be able to use. We actually have an asset store item where you can copy a contract status report and you can make tweaks to that as well. To the right of that, we have our 3 buttons, and they're very similar to what Fast Reports did. We have our Launch Telerik Report Designer. The Telerik Report Designer is included in the release, so there's no need to go and download the Telerik Report Designer outside of RMS. It is all included. Below that, we have the ability to copy report templates from any of the reports that we've made here at the RMS Center. This is just the report templates itself. It's not the data sets. The developers use different data sets. Sometimes they're custom that don't directly map straight to the database, and we'll see a couple of examples of that as well in just a bit. And so when you're using this copy function, it's only the report template. Same for this copy report template, but this is for end users. So if someone in your district makes a report that you just want to make a few tweaks to, this is a really, really handy tool that's provided for you. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to go ahead and make a report, and we're going to make a report based off this RFI screen. Let me go ahead and open it up here. We're going to make a report that just matches what you see here on this view, and we're going to just kind of target these 3 fields here when we're first creating our contract report. I'll show you how to do this at the district level as well. So one of the first things that you might be questioning is, well, how or what data set do I use? How do I know what data table I'm going to use? What are the field names? We have a handy tool that's on, I believe, almost all the screens within RMS. We have this shortcut, which is Control right click, and it brings up a new layer of UI where you can see the table name, which is right here as the data source. So we have a table called RFI_KTR. And then you can see the fields within that table. There are a couple special fields that are noted that aren't available for custom reports. You can tell the difference by this _X. Anything that has this _X is not available to use in the custom reports area. These are developer-specific fields that are added with code that don't directly map to our database. So now that we know what table we're going to use, and we're going to just make a simple report that lays out this screen right here where we can see the date submitted, the RFI number, and the RFI subject. So now that we know that, we're going to go ahead and hop over here on this screen, and we're going to add that collection. And our collection names match the table names. So I'm just going to look up RFI_KTR, and I'm going to click OK. Now I'm going to go ahead and launch the Telerik Report Designer. All right, so here we are in the Telerik Report Designer. It looks vaguely familiar to the Fast Reports Designer, but you'll definitely see a lot of differences. We'll see a lot of differences in terms of how to bind data and how to get that to preview on the report. We'll talk about that in just a second. So at the top, you have your toolbar, and depending on what tab you are, your toolbar changes. So we have some handy functions under the Home tab. We have some formatting tools, we have some layout tools, and we have some border options as well. Right below that is your interface to be able to interact with your report objects. You can grab objects, you can move them, you can resize them, you can change the text. Really all your editing will be on this canvas for Telerik in terms of designing. To the right of that, we have another panel. This is our Data Explorer panel. And you can see all the data sources that are added within your report template that you're working on. And we'll talk more a little bit about this in a second. You can see that we have 2 data sources instead of 1. I'll explain why we have those 2 in just a moment. To the left of that, we have another tab on that panel. We have one for our Report Explorer. This is a great way to be able to navigate through the report objects of the template that you're working on. Here you can see everything that's on this canvas right here, and you can actually select them and change, and you can see it highlight over here. Now, right below that, we have another panel for our properties. Depending on what you select, this properties panel will change. The properties change depending on what report object that you have. So you'll have things like background color, font size, you'll have some docking options, some border options, and some report objects are a little special, and you'll see that they have a data source, and I'll show you how to bind those and how to work with those as well. To the left of that, you can see we have our data source here. This is tied down to our Data Source Explorer. It just shows you the data sources that are in the report. Right now, we only have one data source, which is the RMS_data source. If you delete this and you save the report, this will be brought back in automatically. So if you're trying to remove it, you can't. This is where all the data lies in this JSON data source. Right below that, we have our Group Explorer, and we're going to work with a report later today with a grouping. Here you can change details of what your grouping is. Right now we don't have a group. This changes depending on the object that you have selected. Tables have groups, and you can see here we have this detail group now. You can change things like filtering and sorting on the groups. Let's go ahead and jump to the next tab, the Insert tab. The Insert tab is where all your report objects are. The first 3 objects that you have are tables. These are data source objects, and this is where you'll be tying your data source to, your data set that you apply from the required collections. So this will be the collections from either the district or contract reports, or this will be your custom queries. There's charts, there's maps, and then there's a lot of familiar report items that you would see similar to fast reports, like the text boxes, picture boxes. To the right of that, we have our data tab. There's actually no need to really interact with this data tab. We actually take care of binding the data source to the report template. That was something that you had to do in fast reports. You had to set the data source within the template. It wasn't anything too crazy hard, but you did have to come in here and just click a checkbox and say, I want to use this data source. We actually handle all that on our end, so there's no need to do that. We use a JSON data source for the data set that you're adding to your template. So let's go ahead and just start building this report for our RFI screen. And so the very first thing that I'm going to do, let me go ahead and minimize this so we can see our other screen. Sorry if this looks a little squished. Alrighty. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to bind our table object. And the reason why I'm binding our table object is that Telerik does something a little strange, very different from fast reports. You can see here in our Data Explorer that we have two sets of data sets. We have this RFI underscore KTR, which is the collection that we added, and then we have this object called RMS underscore contract. This is actually an object that we add depending on the report type that you enter. We have a district one, and this is really used for header information. So, you can come here and drag in whatever field that you want. If you want the contract ID here, you can toss it in this corner. Go ahead and move this. And then if you preview it, you can actually see the contract that we're running against. You can see that we're using 1660. This is something that's very familiar to fast reports, where you can see the properties for this object and you can drag and interact with it. Now, Telerik does a very strange thing. So the collections that we pass in, Telerik sees it as a list, and Telerik doesn't know how to see the properties of a list right off the bat. I'll show you a way to actually be able to see a drop-down selection like this. It is a little more complicated than just, entering in, this little text box. We're going to use something called the data selector. This actually changes the scope of what Telerik sees. And so I'm going to first show you the method of not using a data selector when it comes to terms of getting your data into the report in a preview format, and then I'll show you the data selector after. So let's go ahead and go back to the table, and we're going to bind our data source to this table so that Telerik will know, hey, I need to look for these properties in this data set. So the very first thing I'm going to do is under the properties panel, I'm going to go under bindings, and I'm going to click on these three dots. This is going to open up a new window, and the bindings window, or the bindings area, is very useful. Here you can see all the properties for the report objects. So you can bind any property for that report object to an expression. So you can change things like background color, font size. You can even change the value based on a certain expression. If you had a dollar amount, we did an example yesterday of, if it's so much, then, make the text box green or make it red. And so the bindings area is very, very useful in regards of that. But to actually bind to get our data set, we're going to use the property data source. And now we're going to bind it to our expression. We're going to bind it to our collection, which is RFI underscore KTR. So now Telerik knows I need to pull data from this collection. And so the next thing that we need to do is we need to add our fields. And again, this is the first way that I'm going to show you. This is kind of the text way, I call it, where you have to type in the fields by hand. Telerik uses the syntax equals fields period. And it looks for this to find an expression. It's saying, hey, this is a data field. I'm going to pull it from the collection that's bounded to this table. And so the way this works is that you use the syntax equals fields period, and then you follow it with the property name. In this case, I have date submitted, RFI number, and RFI subject. So now if I preview this report, we should see that data set from there. Right, doesn't look super pretty right now. So Telerik, by default, when you preview the table, you'll see it in this one long continuous page. If you want to see it in a PDF format, you can hit print preview, and then you'll actually see it go across multiple pages. Now we're missing a few things on our table. I didn't change the headers, and we're missing our borders, and the formatting is not fully there. So we're going to go ahead and change that right now. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add our borders. I'm going to use the toolbar right here. You can change the borders. You can change what border you want. If you want the top, bottom, or left, you can change the thickness of the border. You can select one or multiple text boxes. I'm just going to do all of them at once. The other thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to format this date. So I want to chop off the timestamp that we have so it can match a little bit more like the screen here. Like fast reports, Telerik has quite a bit of formatting options. You can see the formatting options by right-clicking on a text box, going down to Format. Here you can see another pop-up comes up, and we have a couple different options for formatting. We have numbers. You can change the decimal places. There's currency. There's date, time, percentage, scientific. And then you can also create your own custom formatting for numbers or for date time. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and use their default. I'm going to go ahead and preview this report. So now you can kind of see it's pretty close to what this screen looks like. Nothing too crazy going on. One of the things that you might have noticed here is that our table header is missing. By default, Telerik actually has this property on the table. If I scroll down here in the right-hand corner, let me go ahead and maximize this so you guys can see this a little bit more. So all I did was select the table, and in this properties window, there's a property called column headers print on every page. By default, Telerik leaves this to false, so the Telerik headers won't print on every page. If you want it to print on every page, just set this to true, and then you'll see those headers on each page. One of the other ways of getting data into your report is using a data selector. So I'm going to actually go ahead and delete this table. A data selector is actually something for JSON. And data selectors use the syntax $period. And what it does is you're telling Telerik to go into the scope of a list or a collection. In this case, we're going to go into the scope of this RFI KTR collection. So you're going to use the syntax $period, and then it's always going to be the collection that you want. And what this is going to do is going to create that drop-down box that we saw on the RMS contract object. We'll actually be able to see the properties of this collection. So if I click Finish, you'll see that my Data Explorer changes, and now I can see all of the fields for that specific collection. And now we can actually use some of the wizards that Telerik has built in. So for example, if I wanted to build that table, I can actually use their table wizard, connect to their data source, and then find those fields. I believe we had RFI number. I think we had date submitted. And then I forgot what the other one was. I believe it was RFI subject. So now using this wizard, Telerik will actually build the table for me using a data selector. And so that's a handy way of building your reports. I'll show you that that's kind of the way that I would suggest when recreating your fast reports to your Telerik reports, is to use kind of a combination of the data selector and then also binding your table to a data field. So one thing to note is when using a data selector, is that you lose the scope of everything outside of that collection. So right now in our Data Explorer, you can't see that other object that we had, the RMS underscore contract, the header object that we had up here. And in fact, if I preview this report right now, this field will no longer show up. Let me also add, when you preview with a data selector, it takes forever. Let me actually configure this and remove it. You won't see the data in the table now. You'll see it changed. So right now you can see that the scope has changed because I removed that data selector from the data set. It no longer can tell, hey, what's in this table, right? We only now have the scope of the contract object. If I want to use the data selector, you kind of have to use a hybrid approach. Right now I removed that data selector, and what you can do is you can bind your table to that collection using the bindings. And so you can build your templates using the data selector to see the properties, and then you can bind your table if you're using multiple collections. That way you can see the properties. You don't have to hand type everything. You can drag and drop, very similar to what Fast Reports does. So now if I preview this, I'll be able to see the columns. All right. So now we've kind of built a contract report. I'm going to go ahead and do a district one, and I'm going to do the same report and just show you how to do it with a query instead of a collection. So we're going to build a summary version of this exact same report, and I'm going to use a custom query. So I'm going to go to custom queries back in the district library, and I'm going to click on query definitions. And now I'm just going to add a new query, give it a name and a title. If you've never created a query, this is the screen that you'll see when you're first adding a new query. You'll see that you can add a report description And right here in this SQL text of the query is where you'll actually add the SQL that you want to run across each district. I prepped one up here that grabs these fields. I'm just using the same table, RFI_KTR, and I'm doing just a couple joins. And I actually have two constraints. This one is actually not normal SQL. This is a parameter that we use here at the RMS. We use the syntax, we look for a colon. And then we have this option right down here to add parameters. You can add any kind of parameter. You can add strings, you could add integers, you can add dates. And what that does is you'll actually see a screen before I execute the query to enter in what value I want this constraint to be on. So for example, I have this office ID constraint. I'm going to create a new parameter, and I'm going to match what I have up there, which is office ID. I'm going to give it a title, office ID. I'm going to set the type to a string. And you can actually set the default to, if there's a office that you could run tons of reports on, you can set that as well here. So now I'm going to execute the query. And this is the preview that I was talking about for the parameters. If we had more parameters, you'd see more options with UI there. I'm going to go ahead and execute the query and make sure that it runs before I go into the report designer. And you can see that I get all the RFIs from the different contracts within the district. So now I'm going to go back to the report designer of Telerik. I'm going to show you how to build that report using that custom query. So again, this is fast reports. To go to Telerik, you just click on this button, UAT designer. And I'm going to go ahead and just add a new report real quick and then add that. So again, make sure your report type is set to the level of custom report that you want. For custom queries, you have to run it in the district report type. So now I'm going to go ahead and add my required collection, and I'm going to look for that query that I just made. Now I'm going to launch the Telerik Report Designer. And now it's going to prompt me. And this will actually be a prompt that shows up on the summary report screen as well to run your reports against the district. So again, we have the same report. I'm just going to go ahead and build it really quickly one more time to show you. I'm going to do it the text way. I'm going to go ahead and bind my table to a data source using the bindings field. I'm going to select data source. And now I'm going to use the expression, and I'm going to bind it to the collection that we added. In this case, the query that we added. And now I'm going to tell the table what fields I want to use. And this time I had capitalized everything in the query, so all the fields will be capitalized when I run it within the report agent. So if you're running a district report and you don't know why there's any data, make sure that you're matching what you put in the query. So now when I preview my report, I get the same report that we built earlier. Doesn't look as pretty. All right, so that's how you build both a contract and a district level report from scratch. You can go into RMS and look at any screen and hit Control right click and see what table that you're looking at and then pull data from there. Very, very useful way to make custom reports. Let's go ahead and show you how to create or recreate a fast report template in Telerik. And so I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I'm going to go back to the original report designer, and I'm going to pull up a custom report that I made called Funding Balancing Summary Conversion. This is actually a summary report that I made into a custom report using fast reports. I'm going to go ahead and launch this report designer. So here you can see the fast report template. Go ahead and pull up Telerik as well. Let me give you a preview of what this report looks like as well before I jump into Telerik. So you can see we have a template here that runs on the summary level. There we go. And you can see we have quite a bit of columns here. We have some grouping, and then we have some totals as well. We're going to go ahead and convert this report into Telerik. And so my suggestion is to run both designers at the same time just open up two instances of RMS like I do here, and then open up the fast report version and then the Telerik version. So here I'm going to add the same collection that I have here. Again, the same queries will work on Telerik, so there's no need to alter your queries. They will work for Telerik as well. So I'm going to add the exact same query that we have here, which is this funding balance summary query. And then now I'm going to go ahead and launch the Telerik Report Designer. Again, hopefully this isn't too squished. Definitely, if you're recreating these two monitors, definitely helps tremendously. Alrighty. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add the columns here. And so what I'm going to do, or actually the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the report template. This is actually a landscape. If I preview this, show you it one more time. This is a landscape design, not a portrait. This is automatically set in portrait. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click away from the canvas so I can get the report properties. And I'm going to scroll down to layout, and I'm going to change the page settings to landscape. This is going to make sure that everything's not squished up, and then I'm going to change the width as well. If you don't change the page setting, you'll see that the text looks very squished, and it's very, very hard to read. So I'm going to go ahead and change that width. I'm going to drag these objects out. All right. I probably shouldn't have dragged out that table. We have a lot of column headers. Let me go ahead and shrink that back down. All right. Now the very first thing I'm going to do after I set that, I'm going to actually add and change the header names and add that second row. So I'm going to expand this so we have a little more room to work with. And I'm going to insert another row. I'm going to right click on the header, and I'm going to hit insert row, and I'm going to put a row right above. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just copy and paste from Fast Reports into Telerik. Control C and Control V is your biggest friend when it comes to converting these two reports, or converting reports from Fast Reports to Telerik. All right. On this header, we have a merge between the two cells. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to insert another column to the right before I merge this. The reason for it is if I merge and then I insert a cell to it, it's going to copy this big block. And seeing as I want to have those two rows going across the screen. Let me shorten this a little bit so I can see. There we go. Let me go ahead and copy this. And we'll copy the rest of these headers in. Alrighty. Now that we got our headers going, we want to start adding our data. And there's a couple ways that you can go about this. You can bind your table right away, and then you can enter the text fields, kind of like what we did before. What I recommend is actually to use the data selector. That way you can have access to see what properties you need to add. And that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to right click on my data source, and I'm going to hit configure. And in the data selector, I'm going to use that same syntax that I did before for JSON, which is $period. And then I'm just going to grab the collection name, which you can see right here, if you're a little familiar with JSON. And then what I'm going to do is just click finish. And now my scope's going to change to go inside of that collection. And so now it's going to allow me to be able to see the fields and really work with this report a little easier than having to hand type everything. So I'm going to go ahead and look into the fields here on Fast Reports. I know there's a grouping. I generally work with the groupings last. I just kind of found that's a little bit easier for me. Definitely a preference thing though. So let's go ahead and see what fields Fast Reports is using, and we'll add those fields here. So similarly to Fast Reports, you can see we have our data sets, we have some parameters that you can pass in, some functions. You can set the fields by using this expression box. And so I'm going to click on the fields right here on this tab. Oh, one thing to note too, you have to, when using a data selector, you still have to bind the data source to the JSON data source in order to see the properties. So now when I right click the expression and hit fields, I'll be able to see the properties of that data source. And so now all I'm going to do is I'm going to match what's here in Fast Reports. So I'm going to get the funding account number, and then I'm also going to get this FA code. And so when you're using Telerik and you have two expressions in a single text box, Telerik looks for a special syntax. It looks for these curly braces for each expression. So when you're using multiple expressions in a single text box, you have to use these curly braces for each expression, unless you're doing a calculation. And just a little note too, when you have two expressions and you try and format it using right-click and format on the text box, it actually won't take with that format. I'll show you what I mean in just a second once when we get to the currency values. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK there. I'm going to move on to the next data item. Again, gonna add my two curly braces, and then I'm gonna find the field. Oops. Find the field on Telerik and put it inside. And then same thing here. And all I'm doing is I'm just matching what's from Fast Reports into Telerik. On this one, I'm only using the one field, so I'm not going to use the curly braces. You can use the curly braces if you are using one field, but there's no need to there. Alrighty. So now we're kind of on the side where we're going to want to format these. These are all currency amounts. And so like I had said before, when you have two fields in a text box, you can't just right-click and format. Telerik doesn't know what to do when there's two expressions if you use this formatting builder option. Telerik actually has a text-based way to format currency, so I'm going to show you how to do that. But before I do, I'm going to create what's called a report parameter. If you right-click away from the canvas and select report parameters, you'll see a pop-up come up. And you'll see we already have a couple of parameters. We have one for the date, and we have one for the security marking down here at the bottom of the report. I'm going to go ahead and add another one. I'm going to call this our currency format. And the reason why I'm building a parameter is in case you need to change that parameter, it's much easier to change it in one spot than having to go into each individual text box and change it there. So definitely just doing a little more work now to save time later. All right, so let's go back into this data set. So I'm going to go into Fast Reports and see what fields I need for this block. I see I need other pracs and contractor pracs. So I'm going to go to my expression, and I'm going to add my curly braces. To format using the two expressions, what you have to do is use one of Telerik's default functions. They have some functions in this text area. You can see there's two formattings. There's one with culture. I'm going to use the one without the culture. And what I'm going to do is you can see how to use the functions right here. If you hover over it, you'll see a tooltip. You'll see that this formatting tool takes a format string, and then it takes an expression. And you can hover over any of these and see what it takes, and then it'll also tell you what it will return. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and pass the formatting that I want, which is that parameter that I made. And then I'm going to add my fields here. And I'm just going to copy this for the sake of time, and I'm going to add my fields just by copying the value there. And now I'm going to do the same for these fields. So all I'm doing here is I'm just copying the same formatting that I had before, and I'm just changing the field names so that I can get the right data when I want to preview the report. Hopefully you're all still with me. I know it's a lot at first, but I promise you it will make sense once you're in it. All right, we got 2 more left. Let's go ahead and jump in them. Then we almost got our report converted. So again, just copying and pasting, just changing the field names here to match what's in Fast Reports. And then 1 more block. All right, awesome. So now I got my table set with the data values that I want, the fields, and now I have it formatted as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually remove the data selector, and I'm going to add my group. The reason why I'm removing the data selector is, again, the preview is really slow when you use the data selector. It's because Telerik has to go in for each item and then go into the list and pull the properties out. So it does take a lot more time to preview it when you have the data selector. So I'm going to right click on the data source and hit configure, and I'm going to remove the data source. And now I can see the RMS District Essentials object. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bind my table now to the collection, or to the query, using bindings. Now I'm going to go ahead and select my data source, and now I'm going to bind it to my query. So let's go ahead and preview this. Let's see here. I think I might have messed up on the report parameter here. Yeah. I put the text here instead of the value of it. Let me go ahead and set that, preview it. Let me make sure, preview this. There we go. Alrighty. So our report's almost there. We're still missing our borders, and we're also missing our headers to appear on every page. So let's go ahead and fix that up. Again, you can select all the objects, and then using the toolbar at the top, you can add your borders there. Alrighty. And then I'm going to move this. I'm going to shift all of these. I'm going to change their alignment to go to the right, and I'm going to change it to shift to the middle. On these ones, I'm going to shift it to the middle as well. Now we'll go ahead and preview the report. And we can see we're getting pretty close now. If I go back to the Fast Reports version, where did Fast Reports go? There we go. You can see that I still have my grouping left, and I also have, wait, let me scroll over to the side. There we go. All right, I still have my grouping, and then I still have my totals down here. Now, totals are actually a lot easier, in my opinion, in Telerik. In Fast Reports, before you had to make these total objects. In Telerik, you can actually use, sum up things really fast just using their text functions. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my group. Actually, let's go ahead and group up this by the contract first, like Fast Reports. So the very first thing I'm going to do is on the table, I'm going to right click on the row, and I'm going to go to Add Group, and I'm going to add a parent group under the row group. And what this is going to do, it's going to group everything by the expression that you set. In this case, I'm going to set it to the contract ID to match what is in Fast Reports. And so what Telerik does is they add this column anytime that you add a group. You can actually remove this column if you hit delete columns. It'll actually prompt you up here, delete columns and associated groups or delete columns only. If you click this, you'll actually remove the group that you just added. In this case, we just want to remove the column. And now I'm going to go ahead and add another row that's going to display the contract ID. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that outside of the group because I don't want the contract ID to repeat every time there's a funding account within the contract. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to merge this into one cell, and I'm going to add my field for the contract ID. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to match the color that Fast Reports has. And so I'm going to click on the text box, and then under the properties window, I'm going to click on style, and I'm going to go to the background color. And what you can do is you can actually search through the colors. I'm going to search for the one that Fastport has. It's called Corn Silk. And now we can see that it's the same color that Fastport's had. So let's go ahead and preview this and make sure our groups are working. So now you can see the funding accounts under each contract. So our contract ID is now a group. Let's go ahead and add our totals now. Again, to add another row, you're just going to right click on the table. And this time, I'm going to go to Insert Row, and I'm going to add my group outside of the group below. And again, the reason why you want to do it outside versus inside is if you put it inside, it's going to repeat every time that you have a funding account item. In this case, I just want to total up these columns towards the end of the group. So I'm going to go ahead and merge these items. Then I'm going to add my total. And now what I'm going to do to total up these, I'm going to actually just copy the fields from this row. And I'm going to paste them in here. And I'm going to sum this up. And the way that you can sum it up is if you right-click the expression, you can sum up the expression by using the Telerik functions. If you go to Functions and Aggregates, you'll see that there's a sum function here. If you double-click this, it'll add that sum function. So all I'm going to do is remove this parentheses and put it at the very end to wrap it around this field and the format that I have. So you can also type it in as well. You don't have to go through all the windows of Telerik as well. So now if I preview this report, I should get some totals going on. Let's go ahead and print preview. So now we can see it's a little more blockier. Oh, let's go ahead and add those headers real quick. Again, Telerik, when you add a table, there's that property print on every page. Let's go ahead and select table and go to properties. There's that property print on every page that's automatically set to false. I'm going to go ahead and set that to true. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this a little bit. I'm going to change the text so it's a little bit smaller, similar to Fast Reports. And I'm going to go ahead and preview this again. And now you can kind of see it's looking pretty close to what Fast Reports is. It's a little more blockier. There's definitely still a little more changes to do in terms of the actual report. You can see that the text boxes are a lot smaller. But that's just a quick way. I know that took a little bit of time to get the reports to match. I'm missing some currency here. And then I'm also missing the project name. Let me fix that real quick. Then we'll run through. So on this one, because it's a single field, I can actually just right click and format and add the currency here. And on this one, again, if you're using two fields, you have to use the curly braces syntax to add both expressions within that field or that text box. In this case, this one is the project name. There we go. So you can see they're pretty close. There's definitely some work in terms of the layout itself, but in terms of the data, it matches up pretty well with Telerik, and there's a lot of ways to work around in terms of recreating your reports. Like I said, the best way I think is to use the data selectors, go that route, make sure that you have both instances open, running Fast Reports and the other one running Telerik.
In summary, we covered the overview of custom reports, how to create custom reports with Telerik, how to build contract and district reports, as well as how to recreate a Telerik template from a Fast Report template. We hope you found this video informative and thank you for watching.